Codefendants sound like the kind of band that should never work. A rapper, a folk punk burnout, and Fat Mike from NOFX. Songs about prison, addiction, and dying broke. Somehow Lifers ends up sounding more human than most punk records released this decade. Codefendants came together in a way that feels very Bay Area. Sam King from Get Dead, Ceschi, and Fat Mike all came from different corners of punk and underground hip-hop. The early story around the band had more to do with friendship than Fat Mike having any sort of brilliant label strategy. Sam King's graffiti crew had been raising money for Ceschi during some legal trouble. They later connected through the Bay Area punk scene and bonded over shared interest in hip-hop, punk, addiction, crime stories, and outsider culture. Much of that history fed directly into the lyrics and identity of the band. Their debut album, This Is Crime Wave, came out in 2023. It immediately got attention because it sounded nothing like the usual Fat Records release. It mixed trap beats, folk punk, synth-heavy new wave, spoken word, hip-hop, ska, punk, and pop hooks in a way that felt messy but intentional. Some people loved it because it sounded unpredictable. Other people hated it because they wanted it to either be straight punk or a straight rap project.
Enemy better be ready for anything. We said it until the ending, never settling for petty, trending on and on. Gotta throw the...
Honestly, I loved it. But for me, though, there's a hidden gem that came out in 2024. The Without a Trace single that has been tragically left off of any of their longer releases and has never seen a vinyl pressing. So by the time Lifers arrived in 2026, the band had already built a cult audience. NOFX had wrapped up its farewell era, Fat Mike had more time to focus on side projects, and Codefendants had spent enough time touring to prove they weren't just a novelty act. Fans had started to accept that this was a real band with its own identity. There was also a bigger scene shift happening. Even though punk had been open to hip-hop influence for years, well, pretty much since their overlapping origin stories, but most attempts still felt cautious. Lifers came out during a period when genre boundaries mattered less than they did in the 2000s. A younger audience grew up with playlists that jumped from hardcore to rap to indie to electronic music, all within the same hour. And Codefendants naturally leaned into that. Lifers was produced by Fat Mike, and his fingerprints are all over the record. But you still have programmed beats, vocal layering, synth textures, Latin percussion, piano, spoken word passages, and moments where the record almost feels like a musical soundtrack instead of an album. The band definitely went into this album with something to prove. Their debut had gotten strong reviews, but it also came with skepticism. A lot of people just assumed Codefendants would burn out after one record because the concept just seemed too unstable. Too many styles, too many personalities, and too many opportunities just to collapse on itself. Instead, Lifers sounds more focused than the debut. The band clearly understood what parts of the first record worked. The songs feel more connected to each other, and the transitions are smoother. Sam King and Ceschi both sound more comfortable sharing space. And Fat Mike actually seems more interested in building mood or vibe that flows through the whole record, instead of just throwing strange ideas at the wall to see what sticks. Rivals became an early focal point.
Yeah, love cousin, all love cousin. Sex, drugs, and them thugs bustin'. Young punks hunting 12 black and whites like a dirty cousin.
And it pushed harder into that connection between punk and hip-hop. The track was built around a slower, grittier punk backbone inspired by early hardcore, but it still leaves room for rap verses and hooks. There's also this sense through Lifers that the band knows they only have a narrow window. Fat Mike is coming out of the end of NOFX. Sam King has always been tied to Get Dead. And Ceschi has spent years in underground rap and folk punk circles. Lifers pulls from punk, hip-hop, folk punk, new wave, synth-pop, Latin rhythms, ska, spoken word, trap beats, hardcore, and even a little bit of old school rock and roll. There are moments that sound close to early Clash when they start pulling reggae and hip-hop into punk. Other sections feel closer to Rancid mixed with underground rap. There are songs that have the dark synth-pop feel of The Faint, or the theatrical weirdness of Gogol Bordello. Sam King's voice still carries a lot of that raspy, damaged folk punk energy associated with Get Dead, while Ceschi often sounds more like an underground poet than a traditional rapper. The band refers to their sound as crime wave, which makes sense because the songs often feel built around stories of addiction, prison, police, failed relationships, old friends, dead ends, and trying to survive in cities that don't care if you disappear. Lifers feels more intentional. The first album worked, but often sounded like a playlist made by people with very different record collections. Lifers sounds more like a band. Even when it jumps between styles, there's a stronger sense of identity. Rivals is probably the clearest example of what Codefendants are trying to do. The riff is slow and dirty, the drums hit like early hardcore, the song becomes something bigger than a standard punk single. Lyrically, it deals with tribalism inside the music scene and the fake separation between punk and hip-hop. It is one of the most accessible songs on the record because the chorus lands hard and the structure is just easy to follow. Lonely Life is one of the more emotionally direct songs on the record. It features Lisa Foyles and has a video appearance from Jacob Noel. The song leans more towards melodic punk and alternative rock than some of the other material, and it feels less chaotic and more reflective. The fix leans into electronic production, dance rhythms, and synth-heavy hooks. It's one of the songs that will probably divide listeners. People who want the band to stay closer to punk are definitely going to hate it, while people who like the stranger parts of the band will probably see this as one of the stronger tracks. Reviews have pointed to it as one of the songs that show how wide the band's range really is. The Weathermen moves into Latin grooves. It's one of those songs that just makes a record feel bigger than just a punk album. It also works as a reminder that the Codefendants aren't really interested in fitting inside of any one scene. Crime Wave has more of a Chuck Berry style rock and roll pulse to it. It makes it stand out because people expect Codefendants to either go full punk or full rap. Instead, they throw in a song that feels like old rock and roll, played by people who spent too much time in bars, jails, or squats. Lifers is full of songs about addiction, relapse, loneliness, dead-end jobs, broken families, failed relationships, and the way scenes eat their own people. Sam King tends to write from the perspective of somebody who's lived through a lot and is not interested in cleaning that up for the audience. His lyrics often feel like overheard conversations outside of venues at 2 a.m., where Ceschi brings a more introspective look. He's usually the one slowing the song down and looking at the emotional wreckage after everything's already happened.
Sometimes it all feels like a setup. With all the constant opinions, everyone chewing my head off. So much goes all around me, nobody sees that I'm drowning. Nobody's surrounded, but then you know what the demons are battling.
And the album avoids fake redemption arcs. There's no neat endings. People stay broke. People stay angry. People lose friends. People keep making bad decisions even after they should know better. That kind of writing lands hard for listeners who grew up around a punk scene where addiction, jail, housing insecurity, and violence were not abstract ideas. It feels familiar. That is probably why the band's built such a loyal audience despite sounding so different from many punk bands. And early reactions to this album have been strong, especially from punk outlets and people who already liked the first album. Most reviews seem to agree that the band managed to make the sound more focused, but without losing what made them beautifully strange in the first place. And there's still going to be a divide. Some old school punk fans will probably hear the trap beats, synths, and electronic textures and decide the band's just trying too hard, while other listeners will see those same choices as the reason the record stands out. Codefendants are in a weird place critically because they're too punk for a lot of indie listeners, too rap for some punk listeners. That probably limits how big they can get, but it also keeps them from sounding like everybody else. Lifers feels like the kind of album that could age well because it doesn't really belong to one specific trend. A lot of punk records from the 2020s are very locked into one sound, but Lifers is chaotic enough to avoid that. And let's be honest, the band's probably never going to become massive. They are just too weird for that. But they already have the kind of audience that tends to keep records alive for years. People who love this band usually love them for very personal reasons. And there's a good chance that Lifers will matter more to younger bands than to critics. Punk and hardcore are already moving towards genre mixing. You can hear rap cadences in hardcore, especially in New York hardcore like Madball or Scarhead. And you can hear synths in punk. You hear folk influences in metalcore. So Codefendants are just taking that instinct further than most bands are willing to go. While I was doing my research for this record, I did find a few interesting facts. Like, even though Fat Mike produces the records, he's not the main songwriting force. And when the band plays live, they're often backed by members of Zeta rather than punk musicians. The first album got strong reviews from punk media, even though fans couldn't agree what genre the band actually belonged to. And honestly, who really cares? Codefendants are one of the few bands on Fat Records that sound more influenced by underground rap than classic skate punk. Lifers is the second album from Codefendants. The project built around Sam King from Get Dead, rapper Ceschi, and Fat Mike from NOFX. The record pushes deeper into the band's mix of punk, hip-hop, synths, folk punk, and electronic music. It sounds more focused than their debut, but it still keeps the chaos and unpredictability that made people pay attention in the first place. Most of the songs deal with addiction, crime, loneliness, scene politics, and people trying to survive long after they should have been burnt out. For a lot of listeners, this feels less like a side project and more like a band finally figuring out exactly what they are. I know rap and punk crossover goes all the way back to The Clash. So I'm curious, what's your favorite punk hip-hop crossover track?